May 3rd, 2015, in Garland, Texas, two men carried out the first ISIS claimed terrorist attack on U.S. soil and started shooting. Our guest today, Kiel Pankonien, was a police officer who was on scene and responded to that disturbing call. In today's episode, we will talk about that awful day and another traumatic shooting he witnessed, the epidemic of school violence, PTSD, battling severe depression, and ultimately living a life of overcoming in the face of awful circumstances. Also, make sure to stick around to the end because I have an amazing resource for you. Totally free. I just want you to have it. But first, check this out. Hey, welcome back to the When Words Don't Come Easy podcast. I am so excited today. One of my favorites. I know this guy through the Christian Wrestling Federation. It's been a huge blessing to my girls and to myself, and become a fan of his. I had no idea the story behind Kyle. And so I was talking to him the other day and just hearing bits and pieces of his background. I knew this podcast has always been one for hope. You've heard my story about depression and where I've came from, and so today, Kyle has a very similar story from PTSD to depression, and a lot more that we're gonna dive into today. So first of all, I'm so excited to have you, Kyle. Man, welcome to the show.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Appreciate you having me on here just so that I can share some of my life experiences. Maybe we can speak to somebody that's experienced something similar. So
Well, thank you, and thanks for being here. And I know it is going to be very helpful for a lot of people. I wanted to dive in just from your teenage years. You were talking about high school and found out
yeah,
you didn't think that was for you. You wanted to
yeah,
be a police officer, and so you really didn't need college.
yeah,
Take us
yeah.
back there and your thought process, and tell us a little bit about that.
Well, in high school, I wasn't one of those bad kids, but I just really just didn't care much about anything but having a good time.
Yeah.
I look at it now, and if I would have done high school at least halfway, I probably would have sailed right through it just fine. But I'm young, and I'm there to when's the next party, and what are we going to do for fun next, and I gave very little effort into actual school. I grew up playing sports my whole life, but when I got to high school, I kind of lost a drive. So I didn't play sports because I was kind of, on the verge. I would maybe fail a class here and there, and I just didn't want to deal with that. But I get out of high school basically by the skin of my teeth, thanks to my English teacher. I probably should not have passed, but maybe she wanted to get rid of me. But college at that time wasn't for me. It was something that I knew if I went to, I was not going to be productive. And growing up, we had an option. We did have an option growing up. We could go to college and they'd pay for it, or we could move out and start our life on our own. There was no sitting at home, and it wasn't like we were kicked out. It was, we'll help you through, pretty much any college you want to. We got the money for it. But if you decide not to, then you're on your own, and it's time to go get a big boy job and pay the big boy bills. And day after I graduated, I moved out. Now I moved out and actually went and worked at a church camp. I was a counselor that summer. Best summer of my life. It was good working with kids. I've always been somebody, even when I was kind of a kid, that loved, working with kids. But I did that for a couple months, and then reality set, and that job was over, and the money was gone. And now what am I going to do? My mom actually worked in an elementary school in Garland, and they were looking for an aide position for a behavioral class, so kids with emotionally disturbed and different health issues. So I went, and it was funny because I almost didn't take the job because it felt like it was too much like going back to school. But I did take the job. I was 18 years old, living on my own. Me and my brother rented a house, paid for all the bills, and I was making $700 a month. And I'll never forget that. It was tough. Like, we would get paid once a month rent was 400, and that other 300 was gone within the first week because I was 18 and I didn't, but it ended up being a blessing because the next year, my now wife came to work there, and that's how we connected. She has an amazing story that would be almost a totally different podcast, but she's a T6 paraplegic. She was in a car accident when she was 19 and severed her aorta. And when they went to repair it, her heart stopped. They literally cracked her chest and brought her back to life after 3 minutes. Um, when I met her, there was just something. I was the only male that worked there, and it was, hey, can you help her? Because we did a challenge course the first day. So I'm literally carrying this girl around that I've never met before. I'm literally carrying her in my arms because they wanted her to do everything we did. And that kind of started a connection and a friendship, just led into, uh, it was the following year. Yeah, it was the following year we'd been together, really enjoyed it. And I decided I wanted to marry her. And that was probably the first time that I decided, hey, it's time to grow up, because you can't. She's 4.5 years older than me. She was 23 at the time. I was 19, and it was like, you got to grow up, bro. So that's whenever I decided it was time to go into the law enforcement career. Of course, I had to be 21, so I was 20. I started the academy. I put myself through the academy with the money that my parents had for college. They helped me pay for that, getting all my gun. And I couldn't even buy the gun. My dad had to because I wasn't 21. And I started the police academy. And it was interesting because day 3, I was going to quit. And I was going to quit because you think of the police academy, of the fighting and the fun and the arresting and all this, but 90% of the police academy is basically book work. And 3 days in, I was like, this is not what I signed up for. I don't want to go to school. I don't want to go to college. But because my dad had paid for it, paid for my gun, paid for everything, I told myself I can't disappoint him. And so literally day 4, I came in, I guess, just with a new attitude, and I graduated with all A's in the police academy. Loved it. Came out, and at that point, it was time that I wanted to marry her. So, I asked her to marry me, and she said yes. So shortly after I got out of the police academy, I left that position and went and worked in the school district security department as a dispatcher. And then I was a dispatcher while I was working through the police academy and things. And that led on, once I graduated, I was a reserve police officer, and I was a patrol officer there for the school district as well. And, that's kind of when just good enough became not good enough for me. I don't know what it was, but when I took that job, I remember in my interview to be a dispatcher, that guy that interviewed me, he said, what do you want to do? Long-term goals. And I looked at him and I said, I want your job. Like, I want one day to be you. That's my goal. The funny story is that, you know, driving around in a car wasn't just enough for me. So, some things had happened at work, and some people, some big wigs were out, and there was some training that was going to happen. And I decided that I would help them with that, because the guys that were supposed to do it both happened to be in the hospital at the same time. And that kind of sealed my deal on the love for school emergency management, school violence, that type of thing. And I just started putting a lot of effort into it. And many years later, 6 years later, I took his job. And I didn't stop there. I went higher. And, after 18 years there, I was the number 2. And I was technically the emergency management security operations coordinator for the entire Garland School District.
Wow.
So that's kind of from there to there.
Yeah.
From the little kid that didn't want to do anything to the guy that, just the bare minimum was never enough. So
Well, I love that. It's a very fascinating story. Didn't even know that about your wife, and
yeah.
very just amazing. And this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Mhm.
You've been through a lot.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned PTSD, and I know we're gonna have to go back to
Mhm.
get to this point, but you were involved in two different shootings. In fact, one was a very national news
Yes.
story.
Yep.
So, would you care to elaborate on any of those and how that turned into your PTSD?
Yeah. So the first shooting I was involved in, it was I was pretty young in my career. So as a law enforcement, you wear a uniform and you have to be strong. I mean, that's just what it is. And especially when I was young in the career, we had information that a kid was suspected to be going to the high school to shoot it up. He had several guns with him, and his friend's dad had taken some away from him, but he showed back up over at that house with a pistol and pointed at the kid's head and said, "You're not going to take this one." And so we were all kind of out looking for him, and some of our other officers ended up finding him and following him. And we we were coming down the road when we heard him say he's crossing the tracks. Well, we had just me and my supervisor were in the same car. We had just turned into this driveway per se going to the tracks, and it just happened to be the exact, I mean, the spot he was standing. And so I'll never forget. There's a lot of things that people will forget, but I'll never forget the look on this kid's face. He was 15, if I remember correctly, but it was a complete blank stare, and he had a pistol that he was holding to his head. And so um, I'm looking at him, and in the background, I see two other officers pointing a gun at him. And I'm thinking, if he points his gun at me, they're going to shoot him. And now I have three sets of bullets coming my way. So I took a position. I jumped out of the vehicle and went behind it to get some cover. And he turned up the tracks and went up a little ways and came out and ultimately was fired upon when he pointed the weapon. And so that in and of itself, standing there and experiencing this and watching basically life being taken, was not easy. But I was young and I couldn't say that back then. And that's the big stigma in law enforcement. You can't say that it didn't, that it bothered you, because then no, they won't let you work, or you're, limp or whatever. So I remember a lot of people asking, okay, okay, yeah, I'm fine. And really, for a good 5 to 6 years, I told everybody I was fine. Um, but I mean, starting that night when I came home, I would literally close my eyes and see it all over again. Um, and that led to about 7 or 8 years later, to May 3rd, 2015. I was working operations. I was working the security operations for an event at the Curtis Colwell Center in Garland. And it was a very well known, very publicized um, event. Basically, lady had rented our facility to do a Draw the Prophet Muhammad cartoon contest, which there was an event that led to this. There was an event that happened there with a Muslim group that in January that led to about 3,000 protesters. This lady was one of them, and she decided to have an event there to basically counter that event. And you have to keep in mind, this was literally on the heels of the Charlie Hebdo attack in Paris, where that magazine was drawing cartoons of Muhammad, and that's what ultimately got them killed. So she was doing that, basically poking the bear. Um, so we worked this event. I remember getting there about 9 o'clock in the morning, maybe a little earlier. We had the dogs sweep the building for bombs. We had, I mean, it was an event where we had 48 uniform officers, two SWAT teams on standby, snipers on roofs. Like, it had the potential for something to happen. Then it was about, I think, 6 o'clock that night, maybe five, and everybody, the event was over. The person who drew the best cartoon won $10,000 right there. All your national media and everything was already there, just because the event of itself and everything. So 6:52 p.m. The next thing I heard was officer shots fired, officer down, and two guys that were associated with ISIS were pretty much much sent to that event to kill as many people as possible. Shot one of my officers. Luckily, he did survive. It was one shot to the leg, but they fired over 100 rounds within several seconds. And then the Garland police officer that was there actually took their life with his duty weapon, which was amazing because they had AK-47s and body armor, and he took their life with his duty weapon. And so that was number two, and that one really was tough because I remember as soon as it happened, the very first thing I did was text my wife because I knew CNN and Fox News and Channel 8 and all the local media was there. And I knew within a matter of seconds a push notification was going out. Okay. And so I texted her and I said, shots fired, officer down, but I'm okay. And of course, what does a wife do? She's going to ask 10,000 questions back, but I couldn't. Like, we had
Yeah.
a lot going on.
Yeah.
And so I walked out of there that night eventually when we left the building. And I remember literally walking kind of with my shoulders tensed up, waiting for a bullet to pierce through my back because this building's surrounded by woods and we were not ever able to fully make sure that there was not a sniper or something. So we had no idea. And that right there bothered me. And, of course, there was no support for us. We were handed a brochure and told that if we wanted some help to call this number, and I was highly offended by that. So just carried that as well. So now I have two shootings in my brain that I'm trying to process. And ultimately, within that same year, I got a call. My best friend, he was 40 years old. He was at home and fell and had a seizure in his shower and died. So the two shootings coupled with this really rocked my world.
Yeah.
And 2 months later, one of my officers who had just lost his wife, I had, he worked the night shift. So I was going to go in early one morning to see him and say, hey, man, I'm here for you. And I slept in. And so the next day I got up to go, and when I got there about 4 o'clock in the morning to meet with him, they had told me he went home sick. Well, 2 hours later, we get a call from where he lived, the police department, letting us know that he had gone home and shot himself. And that was basically the tip of the iceberg for me. And from that point on, I became very angry at life. I became very angry at everybody that was in my life. And ultimately, at the time, I would have never admitted this, but I became angry at God for putting me through everything. So now, I'm dealing with 4 traumas that I've never, quote unquote, dealt with.
Yeah.
And, the thing is, I never was a big drinker. But between depression, anxiety, and everything else, I quickly found that alcohol took that away. In the time of that. And so I went from, not drinking much to when I drank a whole lot. And because it just took that feeling away, that scaredness, that everything. And over several years, it just got increasingly worse, which of course I couldn't see it on my end.
Yeah.
And so, leading into, I think it was 2017, 2018, I can't remember. I also became a national speaker on school violence. So I had the opportunity to go to Sandy Hook. I spoke at Columbine High School. I've been to several of these locations. I know people, parents that had lost their loved ones, parents that their loved ones survived. So I had a really, really, really strong network of people that have gone through trauma. And I remember the second time I was at Columbine, I was listening to a girl that was in a classroom at Columbine, and she never saw the shooters or anything. And so she always said, I never saw them. I wasn't shot, so I should be okay. Well, she struggled for about 7 years with drinking to realize that she was at the point where she wasn't okay.
Yeah.
And when she talked, it all resonated in my brain because I'm on a trip. I'm in Colorado, and that entire time in Colorado, I was drinking heavily. But that day, I was like, I have a problem. And so I called home and I told my wife, I said, look, I'm not okay. I don't really know how to explain that, but when I get home, I need to go to the doctor and I need to get some help. And so that's what I did. I went straight to the doctor. I was diagnosed with PTSD. Initially, I was very offended by that because I wasn't in the war. We associate PTSD with our military and in the
Yeah.
war. And my doctor looked at me and said, "You probably have a more significant case of PTSD than some people that come back from the war."
Wow.
And so I had to deal with that. I processed that, found a counselor, started counseling. And when I went to the counselor, I decided I was going because I wanted help. I didn't go because somebody wanted me to go. I went because I wanted to. And man, really, she always told me you're the best patient because she would say, go home and read this. I went home and read it.
Yeah.
A lot of the stuff that she would have me do actually caused a lot of triggers that I wasn't expecting. But basically, through about 2 years, we went through every single one of those traumas. I was forced to relive it, so that way she could help me process it and put it where it goes.
Wow.
And I really wish that the story ended there, but that was the struggle in those 2 years of counseling as well. And just to kind of sum that piece of it up, the drinking kept going. The marriage started falling apart. What I didn't realize is I was really putting my son through a hard time.
Yeah.
And at one point, my counselor told me, I think this is where it started setting in. My counselor told me, there's not much more I can do for you, Kyle. And I was like, wait a minute, I'm paying you here. And she told me, I can keep taking your money
Yeah.
and we can keep meeting. But until you decide to stop blaming God for everything bad that happened to you, then there's not much more I can do for you. And I remember thinking, how dare you? Like, you don't even know. But ultimately, that's what I had been doing.
Wow.
Um, and, a few months later, which I'm not proud of it, but, my job at that time was very stressful. If a kid was hurt or anything that happened to a kid in the Garland Independent School District, it didn't matter if it was 2 o'clock in the morning. It was my responsibility. We had 10 student suicides that year. I felt responsible ignorantly, but felt responsible for every one of them. I had that feeling of if I could have got to them first, maybe I could have saved them. And we had just had our 10th suicide. And I was going to my parents for a big family gathering. Stopped by the liquor store, got me a big bottle of whiskey, got there, drank the whole thing. Wanted more, so I drank my dad's. And about midnight, I decided it was time to go home. At that point, I didn't care if I lived or not anymore. I struggled with saying I wanted to commit suicide. I thought about it, but I didn't really want to commit suicide. I really just wanted to quote unquote crash my truck or something and not survive it or whatever. I
Yeah.
just wanted to be gone. And that night I was about to leave, and it was the thing that kills me now is I was about to leave with my 8-year-old son. And my brother took my keys and we got into a fight. So we have a big family gathering, and now here's me fighting my brother. And I'll never forget this because it kills me today. My brother is a paramedic, or he was a paramedic, and he's seen just as bad or worse stuff than I had seen. And he struggles with it as well. And we had talked several times about this stuff. And that night I told him he would never understand what I went through. And that was completely unfair because he knew exactly what I had gone through. And so I woke up the next day. My dad ended up bringing us home. Um, I woke up the next day and I remember laying there thinking, all right, you've done it. Enough's enough. And that morning I cried out to God and said, I can't do this alone. There's no way I can do this alone. I'm screwing my whole life up. I'm about to lose everything that I have, and I need you. And that really is when things in my life started changing.
Well, that's what I was wanting to know, and I'm glad you went there because you had
Yeah.
referred to earlier that blame God. And,
Yep.
and I relate to so much of your story, totally different stories, but
Sure.
same feelings.
Yep.
I never wanted to kill myself either, but I didn't
Mhm.
want to live.
Right. Right.
So it's hard. Uh, what was that like that morning? Take me there when you finally quit carrying all the load when you gave it to God. What
It
did
was
you feel
weird.
at that point?
It was weird because that night I had slept in the spare room, because I knew when I came home I was going to get in trouble, quote unquote trouble, right? So my wife had been on me about the drinking, and this was kind of like the 17th time that she had to
Yeah.
say don't drink that much, please, and I did anyways. So I slept in the spare room, and when I did that, and I didn't do it out loud, but I was screaming like in my head. I had my arms wide open. I was screaming in my head, and like almost immediately, there was nothing magical. People say, "Oh, this." It was almost immediate. Like some of that anxiety just went away. Like, okay, now you've asked for help from the right person. You've got to let some of this go so that he can start working in you.
Yeah.
And I did. I teetered back and forth at that point. Now I will tell you that was the last drink I had,
Wow.
um, which helped a lot. And it was a struggle because my wife always hates it. I wasn't an alcoholic. Did I have a drinking problem? Yes, because I didn't drink all the time. It was when I drank, I made it count.
Yeah.
Um, and I didn't know how to stop at that point because it was, and so I didn't have a drink since then. The first couple months was tough. I actually would buy non-alcoholic beer just so that I could get the feel. I did that once or twice. It's nasty, so I just cut that out altogether. Um, but I went back and forth. There were some good things that would happen, and then I'd go back into a slump. And then February 14th, 2018, I'm sitting in my office. Leading up to that, I had some headaches, and I was not on my blood pressure medicine because I was kind of like, so what? Who cares about medicine? Um, and I knew my blood pressure was up. I've struggled with high blood pressure since I was 19, and it just didn't feel right. And got to my office. It was an extremely stressful time, and something happened. It was like this flash of light. I don't know. I just remember all of a sudden I had a very severe headache, and I knew something wasn't right. And I texted my wife, and about 15 minutes later, it wasn't getting better, but I didn't want to scare her. So when she texted me to check on me, I said, "Yeah, I'm fine." Well, that was like 8:30 in the morning, and as the day went on, it got increasingly worse. And I literally just sat in my office with my door locked because I didn't want anybody to see. I had a few people come in. I was trying to talk to them, and in mid sentence, I would forget absolutely what I was saying. And a couple of them asked, "Are you okay?" They could see the confusion on my face, and of course, I pushed it off. About 1:30 that afternoon, I go into a meeting with my boss, and I can no longer speak at all. I can't even. He would ask me a question, and within a half a second, I would even forget the question he asked to even be able to answer it. So they called the ambulance, took me to the hospital. My blood pressure was like 250 over 197. And I had what they initially called a TIA stroke. Ultimately, after some testing months later, they officially diagnosed it as a, um, oh, I cannot even remember. It was some type of, basically, I was about to have a brain bleed.
Mhm.
And So I was in the hospital there, and that's probably the day my life truly changed. Because when I was in the hospital, I had put 18 years, about 17, 18 years into that work. And the thing about it was one person out of that whole school district came to see me in the hospital. And that really disappointed me. But that night I had met Rob Vaughn with the Christian Wrestling Federation. I had met him one time prior to when I did a training at the school he worked at. And he found out about it, and he reached out to me that night to check on me. And that really made me realize that I'm relying on the wrong people in life. And so a few weeks later, I remember I was still having trouble talking a little bit, but a few weeks later, we went to CWF show, and he had asked me to come to Bible study on Monday. And initially, I wasn't going to go, but I went. And for whatever reason, I walked in and felt immediately accepted. Shared a lot of this story on the very first night of meeting most of these guys. And ever since then, my life's just gone way uphill. And it's there's battles, there's struggles, but now with a good solid men's group that we have Bible study every week, um, and those things, keeping in the Word. I've come in the last, let's see, I guess that was 2018. I haven't seen my counselor since then. Haven't had to. I'll check in with her and just say, hey, I'm still alive. I'm still doing better than you probably thought I ever would. But now I love life. And I realized that night I was in the hospital, and I sent everybody home and I did not sleep that night because I was completely terrified. If I went to sleep, I would not wake up. And so I literally kept myself up till somebody came the next morning. And it was after that I realized I was only scared because I didn't know where I was going to go if I died.
Yeah.
And now 100%, if I were to have a stroke or die right now, I know where I'm going and I'm not scared about it anymore.
Yeah.
So,
Well, you had said this earlier, and I can relate to this. I want to hear your viewpoint, but for those out there, because especially for men,
mhm,
uh, it's it's not okay. Like we can't let people know we're hurting. We can't let people know we need help.
right.
So, what would you say to someone who maybe it's PTSD, maybe it's just depression, not just depression, but it's depression,
Yeah.
maybe whatever they're going through, maybe it's some of these health issues even. What would you say to someone to encourage them to get the help they need?
Well, number one, everybody has to understand, and this is the hardest thing for me, but it's my biggest thing now, is it's okay to not be okay. That's number one. Having problems, having depression, having things that are bothering you, that's fine. It's okay, and it's okay to voice that. It's okay to tell somebody. What's not okay is to try to hide it or try to pack it down to where you think it'll go away, because ultimately this stuff does never it never goes away. Um, the events in my life will never go away. And so now I have the proper tools, techniques, and the Bible to help me process that. And the other thing is, we hear a lot, and I was the same. Like, if God's God, why is He putting me through this?
Yeah,
He's supposed to be a just God and all this. And that, I think that's what damages Christianity today, is that people truly have that feeling. And what's important to understand is God doesn't put us through things to get stuck in them. And even God doesn't put us through that stuff. The thing is about God is He's there to get us through it, not get
yeah,
stuck in it. So you can't say I'm going through something or I went through something if you don't get to the other side. And so the other side of depression, the other side of that hard time, is having God by your side to be able to guide you through that. And if, when you don't have that, I really don't know, because with my own personal experience, if I didn't eventually fully surrender, put my faith in God, I don't know what or if I would be here today. I really
yeah,
don't, because there's no hope without that.
for sure. Well, I do want to take a U-turn here
Okay.
because I do want to end on a happy ending, and
Yeah.
it is a happy ending.
Yeah.
Gosh, everything you went through and seeing you today, because the Kyle I know, I had no idea, bro. I had no
Right.
idea your story.
Yeah.
But we stumbled upon CWF probably in July.
Hmm.
My girls have been begging me to go because their PE teacher,
Yeah.
Rob, that you
Yep.
mentioned,
Yep.
kept saying, "Hey, we have these shows. You got to come see them." So we stumbled, and I saw this massive dude, the Guardian, and Heart's Legacy come out. You guys were beating trash cans and all the things. Had
Yeah.
your bat and this little. You just have to come. You have to come
Yeah.
see it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But seeing that guy dominate a ring and just you look, even though your character is the bad guy or whatever, is
Correct.
the heel, You look full of life to me. You looked happy. You're enjoying what you're doing.
Yeah,
So it's fun watching you do your thing. Obviously, light years away from the story you just mentioned. But
sure.
uh, what do you love most about the CWF and getting to help kids? I'll dive into that part next.
Yeah, yeah. So really, here's the thing. CWF for me, it's a little bit different than some of the other guys. And the reason it is because many of our guys grew up wanting to be wrestlers, professional wrestlers. They want to be on TV. I grew up watching it. I love the Von Erichs. My dad would take us there. When I was in high school, me and my dad would watch WWE. But past that, I wasn't like this big wrestling fan, and had really no interest. Even when I started going to Bible study, had no interest in the wrestling piece of it. I was actually the cameraman for several months. But the CWF, it was the beginning of the new life that I'm living. Um, the guys there and their wives and girlfriends, but the guys there are top notch. If somebody needs something, we're there for each other. But really, what got me into the wrestling piece of it was as a cameraman, I sat there and watched the wrestlers connect with the crowd after the fact, especially kids. And there was nobody coming up to talk to the cameraman. There was nobody interested to know anything about the cameraman. And I wanted that connection because I was feeling at the point of course, I grew up, I want to say I did grow up in church my whole life. Um, but I was at the point where I was what I considered a baby Christian. And I was ready to share some of the things that I had learned with these people, but I wasn't having an opportunity. And so, I was 36 years old and I said, well, I'm not getting any younger. And I said, hey, I'm ready to start training. And remember Rob saying, I've just been waiting for you to say it. So wrestling for me, that piece of it, I'm not out there. I'm not interested in going out to these other places and wrestle. I'm not trying to get to WWE. I solely wrestle for the Christian Wrestling Federation for the mere purpose of ministering and spreading the gospel.
Yeah.
And because we use professional wrestling to do that, that's something that I had to learn and train in and become the best that I could be, um, in that. So wrestling for me is kind of a hobby. And it's fun. And I love beating these guys up and I love picking them up over my head and I love slamming them. But it truly is the highlight of every show is that last 15 to 20 minutes where we do a gospel presentation. And especially when a kid raises their hand, I'm going to them because we're going to tell them all about Jesus. And that right there is why I do the CWF. And even whenever I'm too old and beat up to wrestle, I'm still going to be involved somehow so that I can continue that piece of it.
Dude, I love that. First of all, I didn't even know you didn't start till 36. I just
36.
thought I guess I should have known with your other story what you were doing, but I guess I
Yep.
just thought you had started younger. And not that we're old.
Well,
But
but we'll
yeah,
get
hey, you take those
there.
bumps, man. And anyone who says that wrestling is fake, they need to come hang out with you for a while and take some
Yeah,
bumps. I've been watching it. So
exactly.
my girls, this is what I wanted to point out, especially Presley. You'll never know this, and I know Tiff has shared with you, but she was at a hard spot in her life when we found the CWF. She didn't have a lot of friends, even at 9 years old. It's crazy. The younger and younger it
Hmm.
fitting in gets hard, right? I thought that was a high school thing growing up, but it's
Right.
getting younger. And even at 9 years old, she wasn't finding friends. She didn't have a lot of confidence. And we went to a show this summer, and Rob got up and he announced, "Hey, we're about to open up our kids camp." And oh, she was so excited. She was elbowing me. I got to do that.
Yeah.
So sure enough, we signed her up. And Tiff actually took her the first night, and she came home and said, you gotta know this Kyle guy. He is the most encouraging human I have ever seen with these kids. He is so great with these kids." And
Yeah.
Presley, from that moment on, has been in love with wrestling, and she's found she's found her people. The last thing
Yeah.
I thought as a dad would be my daughter coming up saying, "Dad," and she did. She came home and said, "I want to be a wrestler when I grow up." That's what
Yeah.
her experience from that first night is. Tell a little bit about that part, the kids camp, and how that goes down, and what that's all about.
Yeah, so you know they've been doing kids camp longer than I've been there. However, that very first year I was involved, I wasn't even. I was actually had just begun training, um, but I wanted to be with the kids because kids have always, and I said it earlier, but there's something about kids, and I think it's in the world we live in today. The kids don't have a chance. They just don't have a chance. Too many kids, um, their parents are not parents. They're living a rough life. You know, they don't fit in. They get picked on, and it's not that they get picked on at school. With social media, it's nonstop. And like I said earlier, you know, those kids that committed suicide, man, that just doesn't make sense to me. So I started just basically standing and doing whatever they told me to do during kids camp, which just in turn would turned into something that, and I finally told Rob, hey, I want to lead this. You know, I want to do it. And so it really, the first year that I quote unquote led it, was the year that Rob had his heart attack. So Rob had his heart attack in June, and kids camp, I was kind of running it. You know, I was doing the training with him, but you know, Rob was running it. And when he went down, we just kept going because that's what we needed to do. And so that was kind of the first year, and I just took ownership of it because I didn't want him to worry about anything. I, you know, made sure the parents are communicated. I made sure the kids were trained, and just over those last couple of years doing it, man, I look forward to every single Sunday night. It may sound crazy. I know a lot of people like to spend their Sunday evenings at home getting ready for the next week. I look forward to 6:30 on Sunday nights because I get to go up and spend the next hour and a half with kids who may not even have a good father figure or may not have a lot of friends or whatever, and make them feel that they're the only person in that ring. And um, you know, I'm big on encouraging because you know, even watching my son grow up, my son, he didn't fit in. He was not a sports person. The only thing he was good in was football, but we didn't figure that out till he was like in fifth grade. And so I got tired of sitting there watching people beat him down about not being good. And so it's not about not being good. It's about how can we make you better. None of them, I expect none of them to be as good of one of us adults. But man, these kids are something else, and it's exciting because we're what 5 days away from the very first ever kids show only. Now we've done kids shows, but they've been partnered with our big shows. But Sunday night we're gonna have a show, and it's just them. Like it's them. It's not the big boys or anything, and they've been working so hard, especially the ones that started this summer and then continued with us, and to watch them, like especially your daughter and that whole match, I'm extremely excited about. We officially made that the main event the other night, just so you know.
Wow.
It's just to see the growth when these kids come in and they're nervous, and now they walk in and smile, and you know, it's just amazing,
Yeah.
and it's giving them something to look forward to. So that's what really just drives me.
Well, thank you for doing that. I mean, we Tiff and I have both said it. You and just all the wrestlers that come. There's
Yeah,
several that'll volunteer to come
yeah,
from time, but
yeah,
for the most part, you head it up and you're there every week, and so
yeah,
we appreciate you for doing that.
yeah,
And now, even Parker, at first she didn't want to do it, but
yeah,
she came to the show and saw Presley over the summer, and she was on board after that. So now you have two Howard
yeah.
wrestling girls in there. But let's just jump in. You're also a youth pastor as
I
well.
am.
So that
Yeah,
is so cool. And again, probably the same things that you've kind of mentioned before, getting a chance to pour into kids.
yeah,
Tell me a little bit about where you serve in case there's anyone looking for a home church, and
yeah.
then tell me how they can connect with you as well as far as following on social media or anything like that?
Sure. Yeah. So it's kind of funny. I am a youth pastor now. And, 5 years ago, most people would have laughed in my face if I ever even thought to say that out loud. But it actually, the connection came from CWF. We did a show out in Commerce, Texas at a church. And the pastor out there, RJ Nanny, he's a big wrestling geek. And I'll say that to his face. We met out there and we kind of connected a little bit. We talked, but we found out he had called Rob. He got called to be the new pastor here at First Baptist Church in Fate. And First Baptist Church in Fate just 1 year ago was down to 12 members. Um, there was, it was a dying church, and I had no idea it was even open, and it's less than probably 2 football fields from my house. So I reached out to RJ when he came, and I only reached out to RJ really to say, hey, when you get to Fate, I know several people. I've been here, living here a long time. If you need help meeting people, wherever, just let me know. And that was really why I reached out to him. Just, hey, I got some connections, and I'll help you out. And so he asked me to go to lunch, and we went to lunch. That was a Wednesday. He asked, we talked for a while, and he said, what are your thoughts on maybe coming to help the church? And I've been feeling for the last year, it was real odd because I've been feeling this call to youth. Like I wanted to be able to get the front end of those kids that want to commit suicide, not the back end. I wanted to be able to show these kids that it doesn't matter if people make fun of you, you're still who you are. And I really started like trying to figure out, what does this mean? Where do I go? I was going to a church that didn't really have many youth in it. So I had lunch with him, and he told me, hey, we got 15 people in the church, and the average age is 67 years old. He said, but there's all kinds of opportunity. If you want to work with youth, we just got to find them first. And I went that night, and I took my son. So the biggest thing I was looking for at the time was a church for my son. I wanted him to have a youth group. I didn't want to have a youth group that he went and played all the time. And, I wanted him to have a group of friends. And we have been to several, Lake Point, great church, love it. We love the church, but my son didn't fit in there. He would sit by himself. That's just how he was. Went to another church, same thing. They had a big youth group. I would take him out, and I'd look, and he'd be sitting by himself. I'm like, huh. So we went. I took him that night. I met about 10 of the members, which that's 75% at that time, and took my son. They had a few kids there for an Awanas program, but the kids didn't go to church there. They just came on Wednesday. And we came home, and there was this feeling that I was having. And then my son said, Dad, I really like that church, which made no sense to me. I mean, so we went on Sunday to our first service and decided to join the church that night or that morning. And he said, hey, let's build a youth program. And so we hit the ground running, putting the church back on the map, doing events, things like that. I started there September 5th, I believe, of last year. So that'd be 2021. I started with one youth. That was my son. By this last summer, I took 19 kids to summer camp. And I've baptized now, I think 6 of those. I've got a few more ready to be baptized. We're just trying to schedule. And we've gone from a church of 12 or 15 members to we have over 100 members, and now we've had to go to 2 services. And so we have our own youth worship room. We do our own youth worship. And really what I wanted to provide is a group. Anybody's welcome. Okay. But what I provide is a group of kids that don't fit in anywhere else. But at our church, every one of them is important, and we're all family.
Yes.
And it's amazing that when kids are coming in, how many of them are saying, yeah, I don't have any friends. And then I say, you have friends here. And one of my rules is when somebody new comes in, the other youth kids have got to go bring them in and not let them sit alone. Even if they want to, they can't. So now man, we're pumping, 15, 20 kids through there still. I'd love to get to 50.
Yeah.
But we're pumping that. We have once a month we do Sunday fun day where we'll go play paintball or whatever. We always do something fun once a month, but it's also very important that they serve in the church as well. And it's very important that that every single one of them is prepared and ready to share the gospel, because that's what we're missing. So we train them, and some will call it train, some will call it disciple.
Yeah.
I like to disciple these kids. That way, I want every one of these kids, when they go to school, somebody says, "Why are you different? What's different about you?" And they can say, "Hey, I follow Jesus.
Yeah.
Tell me more." And so that's what we do. We have a fun time, but it's not all fun. We're going to get into the Bible. We're going to get in the Word. We're going to share testimonies. We're coming off a series where all the adult leaders shared their testimony with the kids, so they understand that the things they're going through is not something that just started. But yeah, I mean, it's First Baptist Church of Faith. We've now officially changed the name. The brand is First Faith. It's right here on 66 in the middle of Faith, Texas. We have a 9:30 and 11 service, and then youth meets every Sunday night at 5, from 5 to 6, and then on Wednesdays we do youth worship from 6 to 7:30. And then we do the fun activities, the fundraisers. We go to the camps, a couple concerts we'll go to, and we'd like to have fun, but it's a safe place where if you feel that you're not fitting in somewhere, we want you there. And everybody's going to be encouraging, and we're going to work together. We don't make fun of each other, laugh. I mean, we'll laugh with each other, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And those are kind of my roles. Like if we have a youth group of misfits, that's great. We're going to have a youth group of misfits. So would love to have anybody out there.
Well, thank you for sharing. And I love that. I love the redemption story. So you go from a kid who stumbled into police to being a police officer. That's what you thought you wanted.
Yep.
And you served well. You served well. But the whole time, all the story that you shared and all the trauma you went through was for this moment, man. And God has you exactly where you were supposed to be the whole time. And he's redeemed your story. And now he's using you for nothing else for these 19 kids.
Yes.
But yet there's been so many others affected through your Christian Wrestling Federation and just you sharing your story. So thank you so much for doing this today. It's been an honor having you on. And I look forward to seeing the show coming up this Sunday night. Christian Wrestling Federation. You can find out more, and I'll share the links on my Facebook page. You can also tag Kyle as well. But just an honor having you. If this is your first time on the When Words Don't Come Easy podcast, I ask that you just share this with somebody. There was somebody that God put on your heart as you were hearing Kyle's story. Maybe they're going through depression. Maybe they're going through PTSD themselves. Share this episode with them. And if you will, please like this and subscribe. That will help others find out about this story. So thank you guys so much for being here. You can always find out more information at andyhoward.com. And I thank you for being here and excited to see what happens next with you, Kyle. God bless, buddy.
Thank you, man.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode and Kyle's story. That dude is an amazing, just genuine guy. And for those who know him from the CWF, the Guardian, he's just so tough and so looks like he has everything together. You would have never known the real backstory to his life. And I'm so grateful he was vulnerable and shared. And for all of you who may be struggling with depression or PTSD, I do have a free resource for you at andyhoward.com/hope. It's the 7 Days of Hope Challenge. And I pray it's a blessing to you. I pray it will help you. If not, at least get you started, kind of like his story today, the starting of breakthrough. And it can happen with this resource. It's all free for you. And just sign up at andyhoward.com/hope. Thanks again for being here, and God bless you. Thanks so much for tuning in. If this episode helped you in any way, it would mean the world to me if you would leave a review and share it with somebody else. Thanks so much. I'll catch you next time.